Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We're going to be starting tonight's program in just about 2 minutes, but thanks for getting on. Good evening and greeting, everyone. We will be starting in just 1 minute. Thanks, everyone, for joining us tonight. We'll get started soon. Good evening, everyone, and welcome, comrades and friends, to Workers' World Party's weekly broadcast where hundreds of revolutionaries from across the world gather to strategize, to analyze, and to build a struggle for a socialist future, for a workers' world. Tonight we have an exciting panel of members of Workers' World Party as well as longtime stalwart supporters of Mumia AbuJamal. I'm your host, Ted Kelly. Along with Marinda Chrisman in Houston, Texas, I am the co-editor of Tear Down the Walls, which is Workers' World Party's section on the struggle for prison abolition every week. And I'm coming to you from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Now, we're here tonight for Mumia AbuJamal. First and foremost, we need you to take action, and we need you to take action tonight. Please take a look at the information available here on your screen. You can visit linktree/Mumia. That's linktr.ee/Mumia. You can visit letmumiaout.com. And of course, mobilizationformumia.org. Please take a look at the information available here and sign the petition. Find out where to make calls to demand his immediate release. As our viewers know, Mumia AbuJamal is a longtime political prisoner who has been in prison in the United States for almost 40 years. And we're going to be hearing tonight from a very, very exciting panel of speakers who are going to tell us why it's so critical that Mumia be released now. I also want to recommend, if you take a second to go to Workers' World Party's Facebook page, facebook.com/Workers' World Party, and share this video with your friends and your Facebook groups and all the pages, that would enormously help us reach more members of our class for this important program tonight. Also, we encourage you to share your comments at Workers' World on Twitter. We are also live on YouTube tonight and live on Twitch at twitch.tv/workersworld. Please make sure to share the live stream on Facebook and Twitter and wherever you post on social media, and we will be dropping links in the chat for everyone to visit so that we make sure that everyone on the call tonight can take action. I also want to say, before I introduce our panelists, that we have a special treat tonight, as after our program, when our discussion is over, we're going to be screening a short documentary film made by Sunny Singh, Hate 56, entitled Murder by Progressive Neglect. That's going to be immediately after tonight's program, so stay tuned. But now, let me introduce our panelists. Tonight we're going to hear a pre-recorded message from Pam Africa, as well as remarks from Professor and author Dr. Johanna Fernandez, Comrade Betsy Piet of the Prisoner Solidarity Committee of Workers' World Party, and Santiago Alvarez, a student at UC Santa Cruz. But first, let me introduce Comrade Larry Holmes, who is going to be making sort of introductory remarks for tonight's program. Larry, welcome.
Greetings, comrades. A quarter of a century ago, in the summer of 1995, Mumia was facing an execution date. The date was scheduled. We had one mission, the movement, stop the execution. And somehow, through mass mobilization, through a lot of unity, a lot of coordination, we helped stop that execution. We did it. Since then, as many of you know, it's been a long quarter of a century, 26 years. We have waged a bold, never-ending, sometimes frustrating and disheartening struggle to free Comrade Mumia, a political prisoner in jail and almost killed for fighting for the freedom of the Black nation. Now we face a similar situation, in my view, as the one we faced in 1995 when there was an execution date for Mumia on the calendar. We have to get Mumia out of prison, comrades, and it must be now. There can be no hesitations, there can be no waiting. His health is such that Mumia's birthday, about a month ago from this weekend, will probably be his last if we do not free him. That says it all. That explains the critical moment that we are in. Mumia must not be left to die in a dungeon. It's what the police want. It's what the FOP wants. It's what the oppressor wants. They wanted to execute him. They didn't get that. So they stole his life, 40 years. Now we must deny them the final victory of watching Mumia die in the dungeon. Now, comrades, we have to do whatever is necessary, as Malcolm said, by any means necessary, to wake up the movement. A lot of good people, a lot of good leaders have come to Mumia's support over the years, but they're busy. They may not know about Mumia's health. In this era of social media, we're bombarded with information. So we have to somehow blow away all that information that many of the forces around the world are bombarded with, to make it clear to them that right now we face another life and death moment. Especially, we must wake up the Black movement. And I'm talking about all of the wings of the Black movement. The militant Black liberation fighters of every generation, from Black Lives Matters to those of us who are the veterans of the struggles of many decades ago, when we had the Black Panthers and all of the other forces that led us to where we are now, as well as the ministers, the civil rights forces, the leaders, many of whom are still alive. We've got to get them on board and make them realize that we've all got to realize that this is the time to act. We are running out of time, comrades. And so we've got to devise a plan. Part of that plan is already in motion. Many of you are working on the events that will take place, mass events, mostly in Philadelphia, I believe, around the birthday of Mumia, near the end of April. But even before that, starting immediately, we've got to come up with a strategy that brings all of these forces, not just in Philadelphia, but all around the country and all about the world together with a conviction and a dedication to free Mumia. Mumia is our hero, comrades. He's one of our icons. He's the most renowned political prisoner of the Black liberation struggle in the world. This is not to take anything away from Jamil Al-Amin, Mutala Shakur, Rochelle McGee, or all of the other prisoners, political prisoners. Look at it this way. How can we possibly free these comrades if we cannot free Mumia now when his life is at risk behind those bars? The chances of him dying in prison are 100 times greater than if we can free him. And he may have an opportunity to have a little bit of what's left of his natural life. We've got to make it clear. This is the moment. To everybody who is responsible, politicians, governors, prosecutors, Democratic Party, what have you, that if Mumia dies in prison, if you allow him to die in a dungeon, then this will be an unforgivable insult to the Black freedom movement. And you who were complicit in this, you will share this blame, this responsibility, and its consequences, and you will take them to your grave. I believe that if we understand this, and if we reach out to others, we must get to understand this, that Mumia will walk out of that prison, or if necessary, be rolled out in a wheelchair, free, and not die behind bars. That's our revolutionary mission. At the moment, I can't think of anything more important than it. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Larry, for those very powerful remarks. In so many ways, we are really at this historic crossroads in the working class struggle. And this, like you said, is such a critical part of it. We cannot and we will not let Mumia die in prison. Comrades, I want to give a warm welcome to our next speaker now, Dr. Johanna Fernandez. She's an associate professor in the Department of History at Baruch College of the City University of New York and author of The Young Lords, A Radical History. It's a fantastic book. Dr. Fernandez, could you start by telling us about who Mumia is and why his immediate release is so important, not just for his own life, but for the entire movement?
So how does one begin to answer this question? I see we have quite a number of people here. Many have surely heard of the name Mumia AbuJamal. So who is Mumia AbuJamal? He's a veteran Black Panther. He joined the Black Panther Party at the age of 14, at which point the counterintelligence program of the FBI began to track this budding radical's moves. Mumia is an imprisoned radio journalist. At the time of his imprisonment and his framing in 1981, he was an award-winning journalist who could regularly be heard in the local affiliate of NPR in Philadelphia, WHYY. In fact, he won the Major Armstrong Award in broadcasting, a coveted award for broadcasters. And he won that for his reporting on the Pope's visit to Philadelphia. Mumia is a father. He's a brother, an uncle, a grandfather, a husband. And he forms part of approximately 1960s era political prisoners. And that means that these folks have been imprisoned for their activities and campaigns and activism in the Black Power and Civil Rights Movement era. Mumia has written, I don't know, 13, 14, I can't keep track. Ted, do you know how many books from prison? Many books from prison, 13 or 14.
Somewhere there now, yeah.
Keep track. One of them, at least, is a New York Times bestseller, and that was Live from Death Row. Larry Holmes talked about the fact that he faced execution in the 1990s, in 1995, and as he faced execution, he wrote a book titled Live from Death Row, which was the first book that humanized death row from the inside by a death row prisoner himself, Mumia, but really talked about the links between the institution of the death penalty and the institution of lynchings, and offered a class analysis of the institution. Like, I think I read in that book, capital punishment. If you don't have the capital, you get the punishment. So Mumia is many things. He's one of our leaders, and he's imprisoned in part because his analysis represents a continuity in the Black radical tradition, a continuity of Black radical dissent from the 1960s to the present. And that's why the state reserves a special vitriol for Mumia. The clarity with which he speaks, and if you listen to Mumia, you will see that he is a very, very lucid, compelling speaker. Someone is at my door, and they will not stop. They will not stop ringing this bell.
If you need to answer that, Johanna, we can come back to you.
Maybe you can come back.
Sure. It's, what Johanna was just talking about the lucidity and the important and incisive political analysis that Mumia offers. It is incredible, and it's truly because he is such a brilliant theorist and strategist and communicator that this target was put on him by the state in the first place. As we're waiting for Johanna to return, I want to go to our next speaker, who is a dear comrade of mine, Betsy Piet. Betsy is a longtime member of Workers' World Party and the Prisoner Solidarity Committee of Workers' World Party, and is a managing editor of Workers' World newspaper. Nearly 50 years ago, Betsy was outside the walls of Attica prison in solidarity with the rebels, alongside our late PSC comrade Tom Soto, who was invited inside of Attica at the rebels' request in 1971 to help negotiate on their behalf. Betsy's originally from Buffalo, New York, where Workers' World Party was founded, but Betsy and her husband Joe have lived in Philadelphia and have been staples of the movement here since the 1980s, and they were crucial in developing the close ties between MOVE and Workers' World Party. Betsy, I wonder if you could talk about how Mumia's case connects to the broader struggle, and what kind of health crises incarcerated members of our class face in prisons and detention centers and these concentration camps for the poor.
Thank you. Yeah, just to pick up where Johanna had to leave off, I see, having been outside Attica, I see Mumia and the current struggle for Black Lives Matter and beyond is a continuation of that struggle. So many lessons we learned then, and so many of our heroes we lost in that struggle, left examples for us to follow, and I think it's very important we pick up on it. And Johanna was mentioning Mumia's books, and I brought out, I don't know if I can do this now with the background, but Mumia's book, Black Lives Ever Matter, which was actually mentioned on a webinar a couple of days ago with Robert G. Kelly on the importance of Southern labor, and it was on his bookshelf. Mumia has, as comrades have said, Mumia has been incarcerated for close to 40 years now. For 29 of them approximately, he was isolated on death row, which is not a place anyone wants to be. But being back in general population, especially today with the crisis of COVID-19 in the Pennsylvania prisons, what had been removed as a death sentence is increasingly becoming more evident as a medical neglect, as a death sentence from medical neglect. Mumia found out a number of years ago that he had hepatitis C, probably because he was given a blood transfusion when he was shot by Philadelphia police in 1981. There are treatments for hepatitis C, including a very expensive drug regimen, but for years the prison officials refused to give it to him. He started a case that was won eventually by his attorneys, and I'm forgetting the exact dates, around 2014, that he should be able to get this under the Eighth Amendment prohibitions against medical maltreatment as a form of torture, really. And his case opened the way for 40,000 Pennsylvania prisoners to be able to have access to this drug should they have hepatitis C. Since last March, we have seen a crisis in the prisons in Pennsylvania and across the U.S. that prisoners are forced to be subject to the access to the virus brought in by the guards and other prison staff who come freely from outside to inside the prison. They are not tested. There's no mandatory testing for guards. Prisoners are tested. They have treated the prisoners to a form of torture by putting them into a 23-hour-a-day lockdown. They're in their cells 23 hours and outside one. But because they're not the ones transmitting the disease, that practice does nothing to stop the transfer of the disease. Part of this has also been to end in-person visitations. And this is something that we're seeing becoming more and more of a concern. There is not mandatory testing, as I said. We heard from Mumia roughly 2 weeks ago when he had phone calls, I believe with Johanna and Pam Africa, that he felt that he may have COVID-19. He was feeling chest pains and chest compressions. We were in the middle of a protest for him here in Philadelphia a few days later, at the beginning of March, when we got a call from his medical lawyers who did the case for him around hepatitis C, that he had in fact been tested positive for COVID-19. We then learned from Mumia later in that protest that he had been taken to a hospital outside of the prison where he was shackled by both his hands and feet for 4 days. And his lungs were drained of several pounds of fluid. And that was, which was the cause of the pressure, and that he had been diagnosed with congestive heart disease. And throughout this whole process, Mumia reported that a very severe dermatitis that he has had now for a number of years was left untreated. So he was in torture. He was literally feeling like his skin was on fire. Now he's currently in the infirmary at SCI Mahanoy. He has been adamant that he has no desire to return to a hospital because of that treatment, even though he probably needs hospital care. And we are very concerned because congestive heart failure, congestive heart disease, is a treatable condition. There's a survival rate of 50%, but that's contingent on the person having access to adequate health care, to adequate diet, to exercise, to fresh air, to all of those things that make a difference in whether one survives the disease or not. Conditions within the prison make it impossible for Mumia to survive the disease. And that is something that we are all concerned about as Larry opened up this session. We're also appalled, and Johanna mentioned that Mumia worked for the National Public Radio, NPR, in Philadelphia. The day we were doing the protests outside of DA Larry Krasner's office, several of the local organizers, Johanna Noel, Pam Africa, received calls from a consultant for National Public Radio asking them for input on Mumia's history. And it turned out this consultant, Annette John Hall, had been asked to write the obituary for Mumia. And think about that. Think about that, comrades. You know, that the state is already looking at, writing the obituary for our comrade. And we cannot let that ever happen. You know, the state has the power to release him. But we also know that the power of the people is greater than the power of the state. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Betsy. I think it is something so incredibly infuriating about knowing that, even while it's common practice for news outlets to prepare obituaries ahead of time, to be doing this when Mumia is experiencing this health crisis, and particularly given that Mumia himself was a correspondent for WHYY and worked for NPR, and that, he was a remarkable and important journalist in Philadelphia. And there's an added insult to that I mean, it still makes my blood boil, but I see that we have Johanna back, and I want to invite you, Johanna, to finish your remarks before we
Yes.
move on. Yeah.
Thank you so very much. We did all get that call, and Mumia is a fighter, and he's got a powerful movement behind him that has saved him numerous times and will continue to do that. But ultimately, we want him home. I ended my last remarks by referencing the vitriol with which the state approaches the figure of Mumia, and the question is why? Why the vitriol against Mumia? And it's because everything Mumia represents, his political analysis, his attention to root causes of social problems, his commitment to solidarity. Mumia writes about domestic problems as much as he writes about international problems. And he has a critique of the state and of capitalism. This means that he represents a continuity in the Black radical tradition, a continuity in Black radical dissent from the 1960s to the present. And his voice is essentially dangerous. And historically, the state has sought to make an example of people who dare challenge empire. So in the late 19th century, labor activists who were identified as part of the Haymarket affair were rounded up by the police, accused of crimes they did not commit, and sentenced to death. In the early 20th century, Sacco and Vanzetti, two anarchists, were executed by the state. In the 1950s, the Rosenbergs were executed by the state's communists. And in the post-civil rights movement era, Mumia became the figure that the state wanted to make an example of, to send a message to those who dare resist authority, resist the state, resist capitalism, resist empire, that this is what will happen to you. So when you ask the question, why is Mumia important? Why do we need to stand with Mumia? Because if we allow the state to get away with murder in the case of Mumia AbuJamal, we're giving the state license to do the same with people who dare stand up for justice today. The Fraternal Order of Police is the organization that has sought to silence Mumia, first through the demonization of Mumia and an attempted execution, which failed because an international movement saved his life in the 1990s. And finally, he got off death row in 2011 when the state itself determined that his death sentence was obtained unconstitutionally. The Fraternal Order of Police, whose poster child is Mumia AbuJamal, is the most powerful police organization in the world, and its power is comparable to that of the NRA. Mumia is important because his case is at the center of the struggle against the homicidal character of the police in the United States. And if you look at his case, a third of the police officers involved in collecting evidence in his case, within weeks of the end of his case, were convicted and jailed for corruption and manipulating evidence to obtain convictions in unrelated cases. But if you look at the evidence in this case, the cops pretty much framed Mumia and cooked up the crime scene. I'll end in a minute, but I want to go back to Mumia as a Black Panther. In the 1960s, the Black Panthers popularized the term pig to demolish the notion that the police are our friends. And they succeeded. And by the end of the 60s, everyone knew what the term pig represented, and it was used often in the United States. In response, the police launched a counter-propaganda campaign against the Black Panthers. They emblazoned the words "to serve and protect" on their cars. You might remember this. And essentially, this was a co-optation of the Black Panther slogan, "to serve the people." That was their the more benign maneuver of co-opting what the Black Panther Party represented. The most detrimental of the maneuvers of the police, ideologically, was the popularization of the term cop killer. Cop killer became this ideological weapon that in the post-60s period replaced the mythological rape of a white woman as the basis for the legal lynching of Black men in particular. And when you think about cop killers, you think of Black men, but the majority of people who kill cops in the United States, the vast majority, are white men. So why do we need to free Mumia, support him, stand with him? Because he represents all of us. And he has been identified by the cops, by the Fraternal Order of Police, by the state, as one of the most dangerous figures in this country because of what he stands for, which is resistance, but an unrelenting determination to expose inequality, to expose the police and its character, but also to fight for a completely different world organized around human need. A fight for Mumia is a fight for ourselves and our highest aspirations.
Thank you for that, Johanna. That was so important. And one of the things that you said when you mentioned that Mumia addresses problems at their root, it brings to mind that quote from Dr. Angela Davis, who said that to be radical is just to grasp things at the root. That's the definition of radical. And we recently, just earlier this week, we had a conversation with Dr. Robin D.G. Kelly, who wrote Hammer and Hoe. And it becomes so clear in reading that book that the way that Black radical organizers were framed in the 30s, which was under the guise of the protection, the fake threat against white women, that in the next generation it was exactly as you said. It was the fake threat against cops, and we all know that it's one of the most safe jobs in the world. Like this idea that cops are out there in a threatening place, they're the ones doing the violence. I want to now bring in our last panelist for tonight to join the conversation, Santiago Alvarez. Santiago is a student at UC Santa Cruz, where Mumia is currently a graduate student under the History of Consciousness department. He organizes with the UCSC Mumia AbuJamal Solidarity Collective, Mumia San Francisco Action Committee, and the campaign to bring Mumia home. He's from San Francisco, where he has grown up in a family and community of longtime Mumia supporters. Santiago, are you with us? Welcome.
Yes.
We're going to, I wonder if you could talk just sort of about, for people of our generation, we grew up hearing the term cop killer as if it was part of Mumia's name. They wouldn't mention him in the mainstream media without using that term that Johanna mentioned. And I wonder, what it was like growing up for you from a family of Mumia supporters and how you cut through that propaganda yourself to become an activist.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for having me on with so many amazing panelists. And I'm always learning more from you all and from everybody in this movement. And, I recognize that I'm just an individual, a part of this much, much larger collective. And I'm joining in this struggle, but the struggle has been continuing for so long. And yeah, pretty much my parents were Mumia supporters. And I kind of was raised, I'm from San Francisco, born and raised. And I think I was pretty much like raised in a community that has always seen Mumia as, like our hero, like our revolutionary, like comrade, and a very like I've always associated Mumia with like love, so as much as he's demonized and stuff, none of that really got to me. Like it literally didn't get to me because my community, everything that I was soaking up is just Mumia is he stands for life. Mumia stands for doing the right thing. Mumia, and so I think it was a very, like a very natural, like humanizing way of seeing Mumia growing up. And it wasn't until later actually that I learned about the intensity of the hatred for Mumia from the Fraternal Order of Police. And it wasn't until I became more politically conscious where I kind of got a lay of the landscape and where Mumia is situated in these things. And that's something that I'm still learning and feeling more as I'm getting more involved in the work.
Thanks, Santiago. I appreciate you being with us and for bringing this message from the West Coast. And appreciate it's so important that we have multiple generations now taking up this mantle. I remember on July 4th, where every year in Philadelphia we have demonstrations in solidarity with Mumia, where Pam was looking out at this crowd of hundreds of Pam Africa, living legend, revolutionary Pam Africa, was looking out at this crowd of hundreds of people gathered on the south side of City Hall, and was talking about how proud she was to see a new generation of militant struggle happening in the street. But rather than me continue to say what Pam says, why don't we hear from Pam herself? And oh, what a great picture.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
that's a photo of me actually.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, I don't know how you got that, but that's really funny. Yeah, I was at the Mumia protests when I was a baby, like literally growing up. Like before I was born, and growing up in the movement, just going to all of the Mumia protests in the Bay Area, at Dolores Park, the 9/11 concerts that used to be held every year for Mumia at Golden Gate Park, and just growing up around all of these, like around folks like Pam and Ramona and all of these amazing, amazing people. And it is the power of, they did it for myself, my generation. So I feel really honored to be giving back, doing whatever I can. But yeah, that's a pretty funny, slightly embarrassing photo, but yeah.
we can thank Dr. Fernandez for that. Betsy, by the way, mentioned in the chat that she has that sweatshirt too in a much larger size. Oh, thank you for that. It really is. I mean, there's been generations who've grown up in the movement. And it's a beautiful thing. And one of the other things that we mentioned on the conversation we had with Dr. Kelly on Tuesday, and we also were joined by Saladin Muhammad, is how it's very important to look back at this history, but also to learn from our elders. And if there's one thing, just beyond the bounds of politics that I learned from the movement, it's a profound respect for our elders and how much we can learn from our elders. And I think that is one of the most important things that we get from struggling in the street with people. Let's hear a message now from Pam Africa, who is of course one of the leading members of the International Concerned Family and Friends of Mumia AbuJamal, and of course the Minister of Confrontation for the MOVE organization. The message we're about to hear was recorded right before we confirmed the diagnosis of Mumia's COVID-19. But it is always a pleasure to hear Pam Africa. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen here so we can see Pam as we listen to her. And let me make sure if everyone can, if you can't hear it, let me know.
All I want to say is long live revolution. And when you least expect it, you're selected. And because I just got off the phone with Mumia about an hour ago, and he told me he believes that he had COVID. Mumia is very ill right now. When he say he had COVID, let me tell you, Mumia does not let people know when he's sick. Every time we put information out about it, it was that we either found out from somebody else or Mumia's situation just so bad that, we got the information. He called me to, like I said, about an hour ago and told me he believed he had COVID, and the department of the hospital there is stating that he don't. He said his breathing is bad. He said it feels as if some heavy weight is on his chest, and he said he's worried about his lungs. So I want to ask people, to please, before this is over, I'm gonna give you some numbers to call. Get your pencils and your pens. And now I'm gonna go into, my speech about Mumia. And Santi said, Mumia is a revolutionary. And I'm going to tell you where he's at. After years and years and years of the battle for Mumia, we have gotten to the point that, in Saint-Denis in France, there is a street named after him. The only time you get a street named after you, you have to be, living, you have to be dead. And, in Paris, and Mumia was made an honorary citizen in order to graduate out the country of France. And you got to know the case of Mumia. And that's because students like you rose up, heard what the problem was, and immediately started acting, acting on that situation. That's how all those things happening. It was youth power. It was the colleges and, the youth in the street that, put the information out about Mumia. And in San Francisco, in '98, I believe, when we did Millions for Mumia, and labor shut down the entire West Coast. 2 days for Mumia, one for a meeting and one to join in. Nobody went to work. They joined in a battle for Mumia. And at that particular point, Angela Davis was arrested. There's so many things I can tell you, about Mumia, but we were at the point where we are just about ready to bring Mumia home based on judicial and prosecutorial misconduct. We had a judge for the first time, a fair judge, because in all these 39 years in prison and dealing with Mumia's legal case, the judges was not fair. They wouldn't allow evidence, people to testify, on Mumia's behalf. So now he's languished in jail for 39 years. And when we get this fair judge to finally, put in so that Mumia can start, get a new trial, and some manipulation, went on there. And Johanna Fernandez, the film sister, and, will be calling in, and she'll fill you in on some more details. This film is very important because it has the evidence to show that this government is in a conspiracy to commit cold-blooded, premeditated murder. And I can't, cold-blooded, premeditated murder, because when you sit down and you plot and you plan, and to kill this innocent man, it's in cold blood. Mumia, right now, can come out of there based on the evidence that has been brought forth. And I want to state, lawyers from across the United States. Oh, and speaking of colleges, the district attorney here in Philadelphia made some illegal moves, and he was refusing to let Mumia's case be appealed, right? And when the Rebel Lawyering Conference, and that's this prestigious, group of lawyers and students, was meeting up at Yale University, when they found out that the district attorney of Philadelphia was trying to block Mumia's appeal, he was invited to be the keynote speaker at this Yale conference and lawyering conference. These youth who knew what was wrong, knew that, what he did was illegal, that what he was doing was wrong, they got together and they disinvited him, and they made Mumia the keynote speaker. Now, that was a heck of a blow to a so-called liberal DA, Krasner, when they disinvited him. So he turned around and attempted to do the right thing, but what happened, the Fraternal Order Police put pressure him, and they went and got Mrs. Faulkner Berkovich, which was the widow of Officer Faulkner. They went and got her, and they came up with this King Bench thing, which actually stopped Mumia's case for 6 months. Nothing could go on. And in between that time, I don't know what happened to Krasner, the pressure or whatever. He came out and said Mumia is guilty. There's no evidence to show that Mumia didn't have a fair trial. And, that there was no judicial and prosecutorial misconduct. But one of the biggest lies that he said in there, one that really bugs me because they were all horrible, what they said was that when when the police brought Mumia into the emergency room after he got shot, you'll see all this, in the film, that they brought him and laid him down on the floor, and and that Mumia was just twisting, he was refusing to walk. And the thing was, Mumia couldn't walk because when they came on the scene, they immediately went to Mumia, started beating him, blackjacking him, kicking him with them steel-toe boots and all that they wear, and rammed his head into a pole. His head was split wide open. The forehead was split wide open, blood gushing from over there, and he was shot. That's how come he couldn't walk into the hospital. But the DA did not tell that. This is something that I didn't see it, but witnesses saw that. And they also testified to this. There was a doctor by the name of Coletta said that Mumia could barely speak above a whisper because he was so weak and his lungs had been saturated. I mean, had been the blood, and it was causing him not to be able to speak. So that's just a little teaser into what is going on. But at this particular point, when you see the movie, and I have these numbers for the district attorney's office that people can call, and for the numbers to the prison. And the number to the district attorney's office is 215-686-8000. This is District Attorney Krasner's office. And the other number is to the prison where he's at, where they're saying he don't have COVID, 570-773-2158. I want to thank y'all for, tuning in at this particular time. And one more thing I want to tell you. When you see evidence, you'll find out. No, I'll let Johanna handle that. So look, thank you so very much. I'm getting ready to make a lot of more phone calls and get people into the street tomorrow to shut it down, because we cannot allow this to happen. And the only reason why it's happening is because the district attorney have not done what he was supposed to do. And he left 15 other people off our prison and are based on judicial and prosecutorial misconduct. And when you see in that film, it reeks with it. Thank you. On the move, long live revolution. Hey.
Great message from Pam, Africa. And I don't know if it got cut off at the end, but she says, "Hey, welcome to the revolution." It's always great to hear from Pam, and just so folks on the call know, that message was recorded a little while ago before we confirmed that indeed Mumia had contracted COVID. And while there isn't a mobilization planned for tomorrow in Philadelphia, we are planning for a mobilization later in this month that I think maybe some of our panelists can talk about. At this point, we're going to start taking some questions from the audience. So if you haven't already put your question in to the Q&A, please do, and we'd be happy to ask our panelists. But before we get there, I do want to put up a couple slides of information about how to support Mumia right now. And so if you see here, let me share, or Marcella, would you be able to share that for us? I just want to make sure that everyone knows that the Jamal Journal is publishing, once again, it's a very important print publication that's being put out by the uncompromising international concerned family and friends of Mumia AbuJamal. It's edited by Mumia himself, along with one of our dear comrades and guests, Pam Africa. It also features another one of our guests tonight, Dr. Johanna Fernandez. It has incredible interviews and articles and photographs. It's really the culmination of movement work to release Mumia, and it's sure to aid in the struggle to bring him home. Check it out at jamaljournal.blogspot.com. We'll drop that link in the chat as well. And if you're able to donate to the link you see on the screen to support this work. And I also want to let people know that if you go to linktr.ee/Mumia, If you go to letmumiaout.com, and if you go to mobilizationformumia.com, that is where you can find information on how to get involved and how to get active now. So please make sure you check out those sites and get involved. I want to sort of ask this question for all of our panelists tonight to sort of get us started in the Q&A section about the international aspect of the struggle, and also the militant struggle that fought back to free the Move 9. When we know that it has been so important to have Mike and Debbie and Janet and Janine and Eddie free, and of course Delbert Africa was finally released, as well as Chuck. Delbert passed away only 6 months after his release because of the conditions in the prison. And I mentioned that because I want to talk about what the struggle to release Mumia has looked like over the last few decades, and how we can get it back to the level it needs to be to free him now. And anyone, I don't know who wants to field that question first. Don't be shy, comrades.
Okay, I'll speak on this.
Go for it.
So Mumia became known as the voice of the voiceless in the 1990s. And people around the world just identify with Mumia. And they recognize that radical resistance in the belly of the beast means something for people who oftentimes find themselves under the thumb of US empire. So Mumia is beloved around the world. Someone said on the chat that they were in Spain and they saw a mural of Mumia. In France, in Brazil, Brazilian workers went out on strike for a day in support of Mumia in the 1990s when he was facing execution. In Algeria, throughout Africa, in Haiti, in Mexico. In Mexico, there is an incredibly vibrant movement that stands with Mumia. And, it's just a beautiful thing because solidarity is very emotional. It's a very emotional thing that that gives you a sense that that there's something in the soul that cries for freedom. And when that is expressed, people reach out from across the borders. And Mumia also writes about Palestine. Mumia writes about Iraq, about the fact that American business is always trying to crowbar itself into Latin America. And that's why we see US imperial wars in that continent. So the solidarity is based on Mumia's own commitment to standing up for injustice abroad, which is something that we need today more of. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but as Pam mentioned, there are 2 streets named after Mumia in Paris. The European Parliament has made numerous statements in support of Mumia. Nelson Mandela and other heads of state have taken a stand against Mumia's railroading by the state. Amnesty International published a report in 2001, which said that the trial, Mumia's original trial, failed to meet minimum international standards safeguarding fair trial proceedings. That is a quote. Among other things, they also quoted Albert Sabo, the presiding judge in the case, who was heard saying by a court stenographer, Terry Moore Carter, she heard him say to another judge, "I'm going to help them fry the nigger," referring to how the judge was going to instruct the jury in Mumia's case. So Germany has an important chapter, Libérons for Mumia in France. And it's time really to rebuild that, that international movement. And often that happens when we take the streets, when we do what we need to do here, to say that if Black Lives Matter, that you need to release Mumia, who's an elder, 66 years old, and other elders in prisons. That's one of the demands of release aging people in prison, has been the demand even before COVID, that essentially we are warehousing elderly people of color in this country, Black Americans and Latinx, people who got draconian sentences in the 1980s and 90s. Essentially the Black working class and the Latinx working class, a subsection of it that the state could not employ in the 1980s and 90s, is now aging in prison. It's a system that is heartless, cruel, and our demand is around Mumia and his release because of everything he represents as a political prisoner. But it's also a demand to release all prisoners over the age of 50 or with pre-existing conditions as part of a move toward abolition.
Thanks, Johanna. I saw Betsy. Did you want to?
Yeah,
well?
I'm glad Johanna raised this. I just want to go back to a comment Johanna made earlier about the state attacks on our political activists. You know, September this year, 2021, marks the 50th anniversary of the Attica rebellion that was met with state repression. You know, where 38 prisoners and guards were murdered in an attempt to crush that rebellion. So we know, you know, we've seen many similar types of repressive responses to prison uprisings since then. So we know the extent the state will go. I want to reach out to the supporters of Russell Maroon Schultz, who also had a program scheduled tonight, but canceled it so that they could have their members tune in and their supporters tune into this program. The efforts to which the state will go are endless, but we can fight back. We have and we can fight back. I want to reach out also in terms of the international support. If you go to mobilizationformumia.com, we have posted under news all of the international responses that we have received over the last 2 weeks. And in addition to what Johanna raised, there is an amazing statement from an Afro-Colombian sister in the country of Colombia, you know, on Mumia. There's a statement from Brazil. There's a statement from, and I apologize, from South Africa, from
yes.
the union, a major union in South Africa. Julia Wright, the daughter of Richard Wright, is on this call. I see her in the participants tonight, who has been doing amazing work there. And Susie Abahawa, one of our comrades, initiated a letter that was signed by the Palestinian Feminist Collective and many other Palestinian activists, you know, in support of Mumia. We need more of this. We need more of this. But it's not enough to rely on the international movement, you know, for whom it may be easy. You know, we need it from the movement here. Just to comment on MOVE and the movement, I want to give a shout out to Ori in New York, who was central in this movement and relentless in posting the on-site information on the MOVE 9. When the MOVE 9 members were released, those who survived, it was the year before, in 2019, the Philadelphia City counsel wanted to offer an apology to them for the arrest, a mass arrest in 1978, and for the bombing of the Move House, as if a simple apology would do. And the surviving members of the Move Nine were crystal clear. They said, we don't want an apology. We want you to release Mumia. That's what we want. An apology won't cut it. You've got to release Mumia. I had the opportunity over the years to be out in Philadelphia, and we would poster. The posters for Free Mumia stayed up on poles much longer than just about anything else. But I remember one particular demonstration we were building for, where we went out with a sound truck and we were able to get recorded messages of Mumia's radio talks. And we would stop at a corner like 52nd and Baltimore, or wherever we were in West Philadelphia, and people would come over and they would say, that's Mumia, right? Is that Mumia? I remember Mumia. I remember growing up listening to Mumia. And we still get that to this day. And that is how important Mumia is in Philadelphia. Philly has been a hard nut to crack when it comes to raising support for Mumia, not because the community doesn't support him, but because of police repression.
Right.
Police repression. And any time activists go out there and raise Mumia, they are met with a pushback from the Fraternal Order of Police and the ministers. I have to be honest, the ministers. But I think we're in a new age. I really feel we are in a new age. DA Larry Craster, I have to say this.
Yeah.
DA Larry Craster, as Pam mentioned, he was elected in 2017 as a progressive. In 2018, when he took office, he got a lot of people out of, former DAs out of the office. And then he took over Mumia's case. And we repeatedly reached out to him to ask to sit down and talk to him about Mumia's case, thinking he's a progressive. He turned down every offer we made. Later that year, it came out that he had talked to Maureen Faulkner. He had had conversations with Maureen Faulkner. He's running again for re-election this year. And in a radio interview he did, or I'm not sure it was radio, but an interview he did with Sean King this week, he tried to play this both sides of equal game, kind of the same as Trump did after Charlottesville.
Right.
There's Mumia demonstrators outside my office, and then a busload of Fraternal Order of Police protesters show up. That happened once, and it didn't even happen that way. We were never outside of Craster's office and followed by a busload of police supporters. They came, we were somewhere else. But, to put it that way, to make it seem as if there's an equal sign between this is really disingenuous for Craster. He knows better. He was a progressive attorney. And he has to be held accountable. He also said in that interview that there's nothing he could do, that essentially his hands are tied, there's no legal avenue for him, and a lot of other kind of semi-lies. But the one thing is, there have been 18 former death row incarcerated workers who were exonerated under his tenure. And they were exonerated under very, very similar conditions to Mumia's. Police, prosecutorial and judicial misconduct, lying about evidence, DAs not allowing witnesses on, inadequate defense, all of the things we've been talking about for Mumia for decades now. And so for Craster to say his hands are tied, he has to be held accountable. He has to be held accountable.
There was a period of time, when in the 90s, when Governor Ridge was, ready to sign Mumia's death warrant, that was under a Republican governor. And it has presented new challenges, as Betsy's mentioned, where we have a Democrat. Tom Wolf is the governor. His lieutenant governor, who's the chair of the Board of Pardons, John Fetterman, who's running for Senate, by the way, as a progressive, is a Democrat. Larry Krasner is a so-called progressive Democrat. And rather than sign a death warrant all they need to do to carry out the bidding of the Fraternal Order of Police is do nothing. And Larry Krasner, in many ways, has he one of the most frustrating things that he says publicly is that he's not going to treat Mumia's case differently than anyone else's. And he repeatedly refers to Mumia as a celebrity, which is infuriating. Mumia is famous because of his political activism and because he is a political prisoner. Because it was D.A. Krasner's predecessors that made Mumia as famous as he is, because of the repression and because of the frame up. But the fact of the matter is, Krasner has done worse than nothing. He has repeatedly blocked every new opportunity for justice for Mumia. He has delayed and run out the clock. And I think, as comrades on the call have said, he needs to be held responsible. And he is running for election, and he needs to know that the progressive base who supported him and got him into office in 2017 will not stand for this injustice any longer. I also want to make sure that we mention and raise up the names of the other political prisoners, some of whom Johanna and Larry and Betsy and Santiago have already mentioned, including Imam Jamil Al-Amin and Russell Maroon Shoatz and Matulu Shakur and Rochelle McGee. 2021 is the year of the political prisoner. There's been a great amount of organizations in the movement who've made this, and I want to know, what is a political prisoner, and particularly how can we use our power as workers with special oppressions, to use our power to help these political prisoners and to bring these soldiers of the revolution home. Again, this is a question for anybody who wants to take a stab at it.
I can speak, but I'd like to offer the podium to Santiago.
Mm-hmm.
What is the question again?
Yeah, can we talk about 2021 being the year of the political prisoner, and how do we use our power as workers, and how do we use our leverage to free these political prisoners?
Yeah, I can speak on what I know, and like for me, we can, like, it's like what Pam says, like, do whatever you can, however you can. And so to speak on an experience, it's like when we got word that Mumia got COVID, we took to the DA's office in San Francisco, and that was like the next day, and it actually turns out that Chesa Bodine, who is the progressive DA in San Francisco, he met us outside of the door, and there's a video on the Bring Mumia Home Instagram. But he basically, he sent a text to Larry Krasner right then and there saying, hey, FYI, Mumia supporters are at my office. They say Mumia has COVID, and we trust that you'll do what is right, as you do in all cases. And that was a win for us, but it was also an entry point, like we were making it known, that we're here and that we're not going to let this happen, that we're speaking out against this, and we're doing what we can nationally. So people have been calling, and that's been really effective. That's what allowed Mumia to get his tests. That's what allowed Mumia to be taken to the hospital. But we're also doing what we can locally. In Santa Cruz, for example, where Mumia is taking graduate student courses, he's a graduate student under the History of Consciousness department. And so when we had that action, there were people, when we had the call, and this is we had an event to pretty much say, Mumia is a graduate student, we need to support him because he wasn't getting access to the resources that he needs to study. And so that was the call where Pam first announced that Mumia was feeling COVID-like symptoms and that he thinks he has COVID. And the head of the History of Consciousness department was on the call. And so, you know, that caused him to message Johanna and get in contact with Johanna. And because Johanna is Mumia's professor, and was like, hey, I'm available to have a meeting. And so right now, what's being written up is a letter from the History of Consciousness department at UC Santa Cruz to SCI Mahanoy, the prison where Mumia is locked up, saying free Mumia and you know, allow him, you know, give him the access that he needs, but free him. And so, and like Pam mentioned in the recording, it's like there's so much power, like Mumia has always been connected. The struggle to free Mumia has always been connected with the struggle to build labor power. And it's always been connected to an international struggle. If anything, Mumia is an entry point into revolutionary struggle, you know, in an internationalist, with an internationalist perspective. So that's what we've been able to do. These are some wins that we want to just, you know, put out there, and in a way that encourages other people to take action too, in East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, internationally, wherever you are. So I'm happy to talk more about the actions, but also want to hear from other people. So yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Santiago. And I also just want to say, because I saw in the chat, we also want to raise up the names of the water protectors from Standing Rock, Red Fawn and Rattler and so many others. And, you know, some, you know, people who are not necessarily currently incarcerated, but who are still under surveillance and facing charges and the weight of this capitalist state, including our dear comrade Anthony Smith here in Philadelphia. We want to raise up all their names. So free Red Fawn, free Rattler, and free Ant Smith. Larry, I saw you wanted to make a comment too.
Yeah, you know, because Muhammad AbuJamal is the most renowned political prisoner in this country, perhaps you could also put Leonard Peltier in there, you know, who obviously is renowned, and we should not forget him along with the others. It's been the thinking of many of us that what happens to Mumia, consciousness about Mumia, the struggle to free Mumia is in one way or another linked to consciousness about all the other political prisoners because of his unique status as an international political prisoner in the struggle against white supremacy and racism and capitalism and imperialism in this country. This is how he's known all around the world. 20 years ago, a little more than 20 years ago, I was privileged to share the stage with the late Ossie Davis, actor, along with his partner, Ruby Dee, passed more recently in the last few years. And Ossie Davis told a large crowd of thousands of people on Madison Square Garden, I think it was the summer of 2000, the millennium, that it is the mission of young radicals to free Mumia. That was 20 years ago. A lot of those young people that he was speaking to are now middle-aged. You know, sometimes I wonder if there's a little bit of a disconnect in terms of that information and that consciousness as far as the awareness of the Black Lives Matter movement. But maybe I'm not aware. I'm just reflecting on a concern, a gut feeling. I could be wrong on that. You know, one would have thought that the Black Lives Matters development, the revolution, would have brought in Mumia and all the other political prisoners as beneficiaries of that uprising against racism and white supremacy. It's not over, so if there's any disconnect, we have time to remedy it, but not much time. The point being is that, you know, Mumia transcends all linear categories. He's more than a political prisoner. He may be more renowned because he is a political prisoner and because of the circumstances that are being framed up and the fact that they did it because they were afraid of him and they wanted to silence him. And to know Mumia, to have read not all of his works, but even just a few of them, is to have insight into his revolutionary brilliance, his intellectual insight. He's a Black working class revolutionary intellectual. That Mumia is a Black leader. He's a bona fide global Black leader. We knew that. I know many of us still know that. And I hope more of us will know that. So I look at this from the point of view of history. At this moment that we face the prospect of Mumia expiring behind bars, and we realize that we must act now. We must look at it historically because it will be remembered what was done, what was not done, who did it, who was unconscious, what was their excuse, and of course, what the enemy did and how the enemy responded. And I truly believe, comrades, that after all this time, and many of us have been involved in this struggle for many decades now. I first met Mumia in 1996. That if we're not prepared to bust a move, to take it to another level, to be prepared to make sacrifices that I can't even speculate about or imagine. I'll just put it that way. If we're not prepared to make sacrifices, could be sacrifices in terms of our time. We're all very busy. It was a little bit of a stretch for me to make this a webinar because I'm very active in the struggle to raise consciousness about Black workers in Bemazon, Alabama, who are fighting the biggest capitalist monster corporation on the globe and the richest capitalist pig, Jeff Bezos, Amazon, and how that fight that they're having for a union in Alabama could open up a revolutionary period of organizing workers that might rival the 1930s. So we're very busy about that. But that's connected to freeing Mumia. And that's connected to doing what's necessary to prevent him from dying in prison. And so I want people to, as we close out, I guess, to ponder it and think about it. We will all be called upon. If we get the seriousness of the moment, I believe we will all be called upon, no matter what we're doing, and it's all important business in the revolutionary struggle, to make some sacrifices now. Because it's an old cliche, but it was never truer. For Mumia, it's now or never.
Thank you, Larry. I feel like it's a critical time, and I know that we're all extremely concerned, and we have to channel that energy into action. And I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We are approaching 9:30. I want to remind folks that when this discussion is over, we're going to be screening Sunny Singh's Hate 5/6 film, Murder by Progressive Neglect. So once we wrap up, we're going to go right to the film. But at this point, I want to invite all of our speakers to make sort of closing remarks and to talk about some of the actions that are coming up. And once again, to remind folks to go to letmumiaout.com and mobilizationformumia.com so that you can take action tonight. Johanna, would you like to make some closing remarks?
Yes, I'm reading here, Eric Lee is suggesting that given Mumia's long history with NPR and the most recent incident, shouldn't folks take action outside of WHYY at 150 North 6th Street? Absolutely. That's exactly the kind of creativity that we need. In fact, you should know that in Paris, in the 1990s, students occupied the offices of Le Monde, the major newspaper in Paris, so that they would address the issue of Mumia and cover it. So I think we need to do for the struggle of political imprisonment what Ferguson did for the issue of police brutality. That we need to take action. We need to take action. I've been active in this movement since the 1990s. So as I was flourishing politically in graduate school and college, Mumia was the Che Guevara of our time. And there was a massive movement of tens of thousands of people marching domestically and internationally. If you were a person of conscience, you were out in the streets to defend Mumia's life. Very quickly, the reason why Mumia is so famous is because he was the only political prisoner facing execution, right? Of all of the Black political prisoners, he was the one facing execution. And the Black political prisoners themselves suggested that everyone focus on Mumia in order to save him. And the Jericho movement emerged during that period. So when Krasner says that Mumia is famous and a dilettante, that's essentially what he's saying. Oh, Mumia is this dilettante who gets all of this attention. I think we need to call him out because he, in fact, said this in one of his early interviews with The Intercept. He said that he doesn't want to talk about Mumia because there are plenty of other young people from the projects that need attention. And when I read that, and I just need to say this, and I want to say this everywhere I go, that statement reeks of liberal paternalism. Because if the kid from the ghetto gains a voice and a platform and becomes a luminary, as Mumia is, then you want to silence him. You want the kid from the ghetto in his place, and you want to save that kid. You don't want that kid to speak for himself or herself. And that's what Krasner is telling us. I don't want to hear from Mumia because he's got a voice, because he's not going to sit down or lay down and die before the white supremacy that lives today in Philadelphia and across the country. Yeah, it's out fucking outrageous. Mumia wasn't a ghetto kid. He grew up in the projects. But he joined the Black Panther Party and he gained a revolutionary consciousness. And then he became a public enemy of the state. Number one. Okay, so what can we do? I think it's a time to take direct action in the streets on April 24th, the day of Mumia's birthday. We need to start planning for direct action. Is a tribunal that's being organized. But we need to take local action. So people in Newark are going to be engaged in action in the streets next week. We need to think strategically. What lever can I pull where I'm at with other people to put this case in the public sphere? Can I demand that my school take a position on Mumia? What about my union? Can my union write a letter in support of Mumia? What about my church? Can I show a film to a group of 10 people, 5 people? And might we brainstorm about what we could do to discuss Mumia in the context of the rise of mass incarceration. What is the relationship between political imprisonment in the 60s and the rise of mass incarceration? Answer that question. And show a movie, tie Mumia's persecution with the persecution of Black Lives Matter activists today and the FBI's creation of the term Black identity of extremists. So we need to have a political conversation of Mumia's broader meaning, connect him to Leonard Peltier and Sundiata Acoli and Russell Maroon Shoatz, demand their release, but also tie them to Bessemer, right? Tie them to Bessemer, because ultimately the reason why these people are imprisoned is because they challenged capitalism at the height of a moment when US empire was being defeated by the Vietnamese. The Black Panther Party had a critique of capitalism, and they were challenging the state in the form of the police. And they became public enemy number one. So I think that Mumia is connected to Bessemer, is connected to Palestine, is connected to the crisis at the border of the fact that we are caging children at the border. Human rights catastrophe at the border is a human rights catastrophe in our own prisons today with this COVID disaster. And ultimately, you know what? We're going to free Mumia. We need you all to join the army. We're going to bring Mumia. What I have noticed, I have not despaired in this moment. I've noticed other people wanting to take action, being inspired by Mumia. And I've noticed that we are building community, revolutionary community that's committed to struggle to free Mumia now, but to a larger struggle to transform American society and the world and to defeat capitalism. Ultimately, that's what Mumia represented, the Black Panthers represented. And that's why he's so dangerous, because he's connected an old generation of freedom fighters, of the Black radical tradition, with a budding tradition of revolutionaries today. So I'm inspired. I'm inspired because I'm seeing more people talk about Mumia than ever. That's not enough. People need to take action. But we're at the dawn of a new moment. And Mumia will be part of that. And if we free Mumia, movements need victories.
Right.
Movement need victories to fight for larger transformation. If we free Mumia, heads are going to roll in Philadelphia.
That's right.
And we free Mumia now, and we're going to end mass incarceration tomorrow, and we're going to bring other political prisoners, because his fame will expose the rot at the core of American society. And it will be a victory against white supremacy and a victory against the police.
Yes, and a victory against imperialism and capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
Johanna, if we weren't inspired before, we certainly are now. And in terms of putting out ideas too, I do want to, it's a very exciting thing that the WHYY workers are unionizing. It sure would be interesting if the WHYY union took a stand to support Mumia.
Absolutely.
I want to make sure that we have we hear from Betsy and Larry and Santiago. Betsy, would you like to make some closing remarks?
Yeah, Johanna reminds me that a lot of the activists who came out in 2014 and since then around Black Lives Matter have said that they were politicized because of rallies here in Philadelphia for Mumia. That's how they came into the struggle. And that's a living example of that. We saw masses of people out in the streets in almost every major and minor city in the U.S. last summer against police brutality in the aftermath of the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. I think we had that movement to draw on. You know, we've seen that here in Philadelphia in the fall when police brutally murdered Walter Wallace Jr., who was a black man suffering from mental health crisis. And instead of getting him the mental health care he needed, they shot him dead in front of his family and his community. And that's on the block where Sister Pam Africa lives. Um, we are talking about this April. Hopefully, COVID will allow us to do it, calling for a Freedom Weekend here in Philadelphia that can be met with similar protests on the West Coast and other cities, um, starting on from from April 23rd to April 25th, with a virtual event on the 23rd that can be a cultural fundraising event for the movement, because we seriously need that. And if you go to mobilization from Mumia.com, there's a donate page. Don't ignore it. Please go there and help support the movement. On the 24th, we will have a protest here in Philadelphia for Mumia, starting at City Hall. We hope to draw in major forces from around the East Coast and anyone who can come out, and we hope that the West Coast can do something similar. On the 25th, which is a Sunday, we've been in touch with the family of Walter Wallace Jr., and we don't want to forget the ongoing crisis of families who are victims of police brutality. And we want to have a solidarity event with them in West Philadelphia. As far as we know, they've agreed to it. It's the six-month anniversary of the murder of Walter Wallace Jr. One other thing, and somebody mentioned WHYY being in downtown Philadelphia. The other thing that's down there at 8th and Race, I think, is the office of Governor Wolf, the Philadelphia office of Governor Wolf. And we are not at all forgetting, while we focus attention on Larry Krasner because he's up for re-election, we're not forgetting Wolf. And we will come after him there. Trust us, because ultimately he does have the legal authority to release Mumia, and we want to hold him to that. And one last final thing on Krasner. There were 600 arrests last summer of people protesting police brutality. 600 arrests in Philadelphia. Several of those people arrested are still in prison on $1 million bails. That's courtesy of the liberal Larry Krasner.
That's right.
And we cannot forget that. He was all about bail reduction, but yet when it comes to activists, he seems to look out the window and forget about that. We have to hold him to that. So thank you, everyone, for coming on this call.
Thank you, Betsy. Santiago, do you want to make any closing remarks for us?
Yes. In closing, thank you to everybody on this call, all the panelists. Like we're doing it, we are freeing Mumia, and it is really inspiring. I also want to just start this closing remark. It'll be brief, but my dad is actually Mumia's doctor. And I spoke with him right before this call, and he wanted me to share this with y'all. That he is much more stable than he was a week ago and 2 weeks ago.
Good.
And but his diagnosis is still very serious. And while we may be transitioning from a crisis mode, we are still definitely in a mode of mobilization. And his health is still being monitored. He was telling me about accelerated aging, how people inside of prisons are actually, their bodies, because of the constant stress, are actually 10 to 15 years older than how old they actually are. And so this is something that we should really be also raising and taking seriously, is that Mumia is 66 years old. He's an elder as it is, but in addition to the bad quality water, bad quality food, and just like torturous living conditions that they're subject to, inability to walk around outside, to feel sunlight, to feel physical touch, it's just it's terrible. So the stress of prison really ages you. And yeah, you know, Baba Zaid is saying in the comments that my dad is going to be on the local radio show tomorrow, 7 p.m. All Politics Are Local on YouTube. So if you want to hear from him there. And then I also just want to say that it's the, and this is also by way of my father, is that it's the power of the people and it's the people's love for Mumia that is keeping him alive, like quite literally.
That's right.
It's the fact that we're doing this here and doing what we can and building community virtually and writing him letters and giving, you know, sending him prayers, you know, like he really does, he is receptive and he is receiving that. So we can't give up and we won't give up. And we really, this is a really urgent time still to free Mumia, to call for the immediate release of all elderly prisoners, all at-risk prisoners, all political prisoners. It's the moral obligation, as Johanna says, of the young generation to free our elders who have given us so much of the knowledge and the strategy and organizing freedoms that we have today. And so I'm gonna just name some progressive or so-called progressive DAs. Jose Garza in Travis County, Texas, Chesa Boudin in San Francisco, Stephanie Morales in Portsmouth, Virginia, George Gascon in Los Angeles, Eric Gonzalez in Brooklyn, Fannie Willis in Fulton County, Georgia, and Jason Williams in New Orleans, Louisiana. And this is one strategy to pressure these DAs who say that they're progressive. If you're progressive, and like this is really just about like giving a human being the ability to live out his life in a righteous and in a whole way. So we need to pressure them to take a stand. And you know, when we had the action in San Francisco, people from an action in solidarity with Bessemer came over to the Mumia Solidarity Action. So these links and these coalitions are going to form and continue to build and grow naturally. It's just about getting out there and getting out on the street in a safe way, of course. Yeah, so we're actually going to be meeting tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. And if you want to join that, we've got over 100 people who want to sign up and get involved. So you can go to Linktree/Mumia, and there's going to be a Google survey called Get Involved. And it should be the second or third tab there. And if you sign that out, it'll say what school you go to, what labor union you're a part of, where you're from, just some basic information. And go on there, sign up, and join our weekly meetings, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time, to figure out what we can do. We want everybody to be a part of freeing Mumia. I'll just leave it at that. But thanks again. It's really an honor to be here.
Thank you, Santiago. And shout out to Brother Zaid Muhammad. Definitely check out Dr. Alvarez tomorrow at 7 p.m. on All Politics Are Local. I know, Johanna, you wanted to make one more quick comment, and then Larry, you can bring us home.
Yes.
And I just want to remind everyone to stick around after this discussion for the screening of Sunny Singh's Hate 5/6 film that we're going to be playing right after. Go ahead, Johanna.
I just want to lift up the name of Pam Africa.
Yes.
Because she's not here with us in person, but Pam Africa is the fierce warrior, minister of confrontation of the MOVE organization, who's been the constant in this movement for 40 years and who's intervened critically at moments of crisis in Mumia's life and understood that we can only save his life and free him through struggle on the ground and in the streets.
That's right.
And so, yeah, I mean, Pam, we need more Pam Africas. And I just wanted to acknowledge her fierce work over all of these years, 40 years.
Thank you so much, Johanna. And solidarity with Pam, one of the most brilliant, certainly the most brilliant strategist I've ever met. I don't know where the movement would be without Pam. Comrade Larry, why don't you bring us home for tonight?
Wow, well, Comrade Johanna and Betsy and Santiago have broken it down and laid it out as beautifully and as clearly and made all the connections as any time I can recall hearing. And I'm inspired, and I'm always inspired. I'm even more inspired. For those of you, and I hope that's all of you on this program who are participating in the Solidarity with Bessemer events on the International Day of Solidarity with that mostly Black Amazon workers in Alabama who are fighting for a union. Carry a sign for Mumia. And if you can, connect it to Bessemer. So how do I do? I don't know how to do that, but I'm just thinking as I'm talking to you, I'm thinking out loud. Don't pay me no much attention, but Mumia's revolutionary heart is in Bessemer.
Yeah. And we know, comrades, that if Mumia was not so sick right now, that we would be hearing his beautiful voice.
You'd be providing some leadership.
Exactly.
Guidance.
He would be putting that out. Comrades, I want to thank all of you so much. Larry Holmes, Dr. Johanna Fernandez, Santiago Alvarez, Betsy Piet, thank you so much for being with us. Everyone who's been listening, it's incredible. This was a much longer broadcast than we normally have on Thursday nights, and almost everybody has stayed on for the entirety of the program, which I think says a lot. I think it says a lot. And so I just want to thank everyone who took the time to speak and to gather for Mumia AbuJamal tonight. You can join us this time every week, Thursdays, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. And make sure you don't miss our special event hosted by Workers' World Party's Women and Gender Oppressed Caucus on this Sunday, March 21st, for Women's History Month. Stick around now for the film by Sunny Singh by Hate 56 that we're going to be watching. And let me just say, brick by brick, wall by wall, we're going to free Mumia AbuJamal. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, wait till we come. The reason why we're out here, NPR is doing an obituary on Mumia AbuJamal, an innocent Black political prisoner who the government has done this to. What we're saying is everything has got to stop. They are in a conspiracy to commit cold-blooded, premeditated murder. That's right. Honk them horns. Honk them. What we let them crash now is that this is the beginning of a complete shutdown of this entire city.
Mumia is in jail because he symbolizes revolution. This is why he needs to come home. He needs to be free because Mumia symbolizes revolution. They want him to die there because they think the revolution is going to die with him. If Black Lives Matter, everybody should be out here fighting for Mumia. Let's not just fight for those who are deceased, those who are no longer here. We have to fight for those who are here right now. We have to fight for those freedom fighters who are out there fighting daily for our freedom, for our liberation, to make us aware and conscious of what is taking place in this country.
I'm saying I'm willing to take that commitment all the way. If Rizzo coming here, I'm willing to fight Rizzo off to the death, which is he'll be murdering me. Saying I would rather die than have to live under the stranglehold of Rizzo.
They dragged her baby on the goddamn curb and stopped it, man.
I'm saying you questioning us. You want us to put it out there. So if we say, yeah, we're going to fight a cop, you put it all over the place, that move is going to result in violence.
Yeah, you want him to say what you want him to say.
When Rizzo said he was going to use force, did you make him go down to detail to say, well, yeah, if they resist, I'm going to kill them? Did you make him put out his intentions? No. You don't never question Rizzo. And Rizzo is questionable. That man ain't told the truth since he got in office. That man ain't been agreeable since he got the name of mayor. We saying it's about time Did y'all start putting the truth? Don't question the person that's telling the truth. Question the person that's telling the lie.
We were in jail for 41 years. We went in them prisons healthy, and they systematically killed my sister Merle in 1995, my husband Phil in 2005, and my brother Delbert. He came home, but they had already did so much damage to him in prison through medical neglect, just like they do on Mumia, that he was only out here a few months, where the doctor said his condition was such that had he got proper treatment, he could have had years to live. Years. They were appalled at the condition that Delbert was in, appalled at the mistreatment that he suffered in them prisons. And we're telling you this because we want y'all to know that we're not exaggerating about Mumia. We're not making this up because, you know, I was trained just like everybody else to believe that doctors are good, they're your friends, officials are honest, they will do what's right. But I've been in MOVE and I'm John Africa taught, and I've seen that that's all a lie. They systematically killed my family, not just with guns and bombs, but through medical neglect. And we're telling you that they do kill people in prison. Don't think they don't. And they get away with it because, like Janet said, when a doctor says something, you're taught to believe it. And they even said in prison when my sister Merle and my husband died, that they died under suspicious circumstances. They couldn't kill us with guns on August 8th. They couldn't kill us with that 100-year sentence. So they systematically poisoned our family in those prisons. And they used the medical department to finish it off. And nothing was said about it because you feel like, well, they got sick and they died. And to them, this was the perfect opportunity to kill Mumia. And you can't let them kill Mumia. And see, this is close to our heart, not only because Mumia stood up for MOVE when nobody else would. He was the only journalist in the 70s that would print the truth, no matter what they said. He was the president of the Black Journalists Association. He had his own show on WNPR. He had his own column in the Tribune. He would not stop. He would not lie. His bosses told him to lie, to stop writing about the MOVE situation. And he said, that's my job. They slowly took everything from him. They took his show on NPR. They took his position at the Tribune. They dropped him from the Black Journalists Association. Mumia was relegated to driving a taxi. This man that had a prestigious position in the journalistic world, you know, and they did it because he wouldn't stop. And then they came right out and they shot him in the streets. And you know when they shot him, it was 2 days after Mumia called into a radio program where the judge that sentenced us to 100 years was on the radio, Judge Malman. Mumia called in and asked the judge who killed James Ramp that they had us in jail for. And he pushed and pushed. The judge tried to evade the question, and Mumia wouldn't stop. Finally, the judge just said, I don't know who killed the cop, but they said they're a family, and I sentenced them as a family. 3 days later, our family called. We called home, and our family said Mumia has been shot in the street, in the hospital, close to death, and they charging him with murder. And we want y'all to know that they are using Mumia as an example. They are using him as an intimidation tactic to show people this is what you get if you dare to stand up against us. You can't let them do that. People were silent about the August 8th attack on MOVE. People were silent about the May 13th bombing of our innocent babies. My son was in that house. All my kids, all my sisters and brothers, our animals was in that house. And people did not fight like they should have. And look at the conditions around you. After that happened, because this system told them, if you let us do this to MOVE, we know we can do anything we want to y'all. They started shooting people down in the streets. I looked up, I'm in prison, I look up, I turn on my TV and I see a cop shoot this man in the car right next to his wife and this little girl in the back seat and killed killed him when the man said, I'm reaching for my ID to show you I am allowed to carry a concealed weapon. He told the cop this before he put his hand in his pocket, and that cop shot him dead in front of his family. So we're telling y'all, silence is not safety.
We have an ancestral obligation to do what's right. We have an ancestral obligation to do what's right. We are all ancestors in progress. One day, they're going to be pouring water 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now and saying some of our names in this room right here. What does that mean, family? We're going to be able to tell our children and children's children that we fought like hell to bring Muhammad AbuJamal home. That's the message. Because we put a line in the sand. You're either with the people or you're not. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. You're either with the people or you're not. We don't care what you call yourself. Do what's right for the people or we on your behind.
Rizzo is saying the MOVE organization has the right to die. We don't have the right to live. What we telling Rizzo is any time that you got a system that has theft under its feet, that has rape under its feet, that's turned in a whole fucking globe up and down, then you got a problem. And what the MOVE organization is saying is we talking about eliminating that problem.
Everybody needs to be outraged. I mean, outraged about this situation. Look at Mumia when he first went to jail. He was innocent. He's still innocent. But because this government was so desperate in trying to stop Mumia, trying to kill Mumia, look at him then and look at him now. People, wake up. They are trying to kill Mumia because for years he has been the voice of the people. He has been speaking out against injustice, speaking out against brutality, speaking out against racism, sexism, and everything. They know the support he has, so they want to stop him because they feel like if they can stop him, they can stop this fight. But we can't allow them to do that, y'all, because if they stop Mumia, then they're stopping you. See, when they were shooting and still shooting our brothers down in the street, in earlier days, they got away with it a little bit because they could lie and nobody had any proof of it. But now you got cameras and you're seeing proof of it and they still getting away with it. But in them hospitals, when the doctor is there and doing things, you can't see what's going on. So it's nothing but a repeat of them shooting them down in the back, in the street, as if they're shooting them down in the medical department and the prison. But people have got to realize you've got to do something because it don't stop with Mumia. It don't stop with MOVE. It's all of us. You know how they feel about black people. They want to stop us anyway. Genocide. And Mumia, a revolutionary genocide. They want to stop his voice. They want to stop that movement because anything that brings people together to fight against this system, they want to stop it. And that's why we got to start it and push it and push it and push it. And don't let these people kill Mumia because that's what they're trying to do. Now, how do you write a whole obituary for somebody who's still alive? Mumia ain't dead, but they want him dead. And we know they want him dead. It's hard for me to sleep at night because I know what these people are trying to do. Because I know what they did to my daughter, my son, my brothers, my sisters, my family. They dropped a bomb and murdered 11 of our family members because we are about revolution. Because we want to expose this system for what they really are. Understand what I'm saying, y'all? Bomb and murder our family. They came with their guns, they came with their jails, they came with their bats, they came with their prison sentences, and they came with a bomb. So don't be illusioned that what they're doing to Mumia ain't real. It's real. Anytime they drop a bomb and murder people because you speak out against this rotten system, they don't want people to know about this system. They want to think it's milk and honey. It ain't milk and honey. It's bullets and bombs. Brutality, racism, that's what it is. And people have got to realize this. And the only way, y'all, the only way that we're going to get rid of it is if we fight together to bring it down. Because the power is in the people. The power is in us, not in them. They are the few, we are the many.
They got money, but we got fight in us. They said I killed the cop. They know goddamn well they killed the old cop. But we spent 41 years, all nine of us in prison for that. You can't believe nothing they said. But that's what people have been trained in the system to believe. If the judge says something, it's so. If the doctor says something, it's so. But if it's not in their benefit, if it's against this government, they will lie, y'all. They do lie, y'all. And we are fighting to do what's right for all of life. So we need everybody to fight with us. And we gotta fight hard right now for Mumia, because this is what's happening right now with Mumia. On the move.
You said on Amy Goodman's show about Mumia's chances. You didn't say that Mumia was guilty on her show.
One of the least known facts of the case is that Mumia was nearly beaten to death at the crime scene. Within weeks of the end of the trial, a third of the police involved in this case were jailed for systematically tampering with evidence to obtain convictions in cases across Philadelphia. At least one police officer in the case, James Forbes, lied on the stand saying he'd properly handled guns. What are the recourses for addressing police corruption, both in Mumia AbuJamal's case and that of so many others in which police were jailed for wrongdoing, but the victims remained in jail? Some say Philadelphia has a history of cases like this.
You know, it is a microcosm of the realities of what progressive prosecutors face now when they're trying to go back in time and do justice, when they're trying to do justice moving forward, when they're trying to comply with their obligations to give exculpatory information in a culture that used to shred and used to hide and used to destroy, a culture that I experienced for almost 30 years as a criminal defense and civil rights attorney.
But one thing for sure, Krasner, NPR has commissioned WHYY to do an obituary for Mumia. You better pray to God, motherfucker. You better pray to God that nothing happens to Mumia. You are up there, you the motherfucking Judas. You the motherfucking Judas to humanity. You the motherfucking Judas to justice. Krasner and the Black Messiah. You know that motherfucking shit was so heavy on the traitor's mind that he turned around and committed suicide. You can't live with what you're doing. When you look at the pictures of Mumia, think about what you have done. Mumia could have been out here if you did the right thing. And we're organizing throughout the world to bring attention down here. On April the 24th, we're gonna shut this motherfucker down.
Once again, I just want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight. Free Mumia, free 'em all.